Hi, everyone. This is Dan Mallow, a paranormal yacker. I invite you to join me in viewing part 2 of my interview with Steve Vernon, author of Where the Ghosts Are, a guide to Nova Scotia's spookiest places. The Churchill Mansion is an old home in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, that had been converted into an inn. Its original owner, Aaron Churchill, a famous seafarer and entrepreneur, is said to haunt it. Could you, Steve, elaborate on Aaron and tell me some of the stories that abound regarding his haunting of the mansion?
The funny thing about the Churchill Mansion is that most ghost story collectors will tell you that the mansion is located in Yarmouth, but actually the mansion is located about 18 kilometers north of Yarmouth, hidden along the Evangeline Trail just outside of the small Acadian town of Port Maitland. Now, the fellow who owned it, Aaron Flint Churchill. Aaron Flint Churchill, that's a heck of a moniker. He was born back in 1850 in a tiny village of Brooklyn, Nova Scotia. He built the mansion by and he built it pretty near by hand. He was a seafarer and he had a ropey, work hardened muscles, and he worked aboard his uncle's ship, Research. He was serving as the first mate at the time of the voyage back in 1866. 16 was young to be a first mate, but he'd earned it honestly. He proved that after the ship's rudder snapped in two. The rudder, what you steer by, he put together a makeshift rudder. He clambered over the side into ice cold water, and you have to understand that the water in the Atlantic Ocean, most times of the year, that far out in the water, is cold enough that the blood in your veins, which is kind of tomato soup warm, will descend somewhere around the range of a Dairy Queen strawberry slushy. Blood will freeze, it'll congeal, you'll drown, you'll die, sort of thing. But he took a chance on that cold water, and he tied up the rudder long enough to make it work and stay together till they got back to port. And as a reward, he was, made the first mate. The ghost itself. Yeah, I have to apologize because this collection is about 3 books back from 3 other books that I've written. So I've got a lot of stories cluttered up in my attic brain here. Churchill himself passed away after a 2-year battle of illness, and his body was shipped back home and he was buried in the family lot. His wife, Lois Churchill, passed away 7 years later. There are an awful lot of stories. Here we go. Churchill Mansion. It's one of the go-to places for a lot of local practicing ghost hunters. 2004, the Cold Spot Paranormal Research Team, one of Canada's oldest paranormal investigation groups, were the first to visit. They experienced several unexplicable temperature shifts as well as isolated cold spots or loud thumping footsteps heard. One of the investigators said he felt an invisible hand reach in straight through his chest and squeeze his lung. Besides the ghost stories I collect, I write a lot of horror stories. The idea of some feller reaching through your chest and squeezing your lung just scares the bejeebies out of me. In 2006, the Rescue Medium paid a visit to the mansion for the 13th episode of their reality show's first season. They sensed a ghostly apparition of a woman in white walking down the road towards the mansion. Locals have often reported seeing this particular apparition. Sometimes she's seen walking from the graveyard, while other times she walks right out of the depths of Darling Lake and up the hill towards Churchill Mansion. Some folks believe, due to the apparition's lonely, sad eyes, and I'm not sure how they got close enough to see her eyes, but there it is, that the woman in white might actually be the spirit of Lotta Churchill herself, still haunting this location. There's been quite a few sightings. When I first came to Yarmouth, they would talk about the Churchill Mansion, and they'd say sometimes you'd see lights going on and off, go on and off. Sometimes you'd see that ball lightning crackling through the Widow's Walk up at the top, where you'd look out with your telescope sort of thing. That's pretty well all the stories I can think of offhand about the Churchill Mansion. There's a lot of interwoven stories.
There have been many rumors about buried treasure on Oak Island. What's the backstory to those rumors, and has any treasure been found there?
The closest thing to any treasure is a small gold chain. I do talk a lot about it in the book, but it's been so thoroughly investigated. There is the ghost of a dog that's seen around Oak Island, and I think it was a dog that belonged to one of the treasure hunters. As for ghosts itself, there isn't a lot of ghost stories told about it. It's mostly about if you dig in the right spot, you're going to, come up with your retirement funds.
The Five Fishermen restaurant is housed in a building that was originally constructed as a schoolhouse in 1817. Staff and patrons alike have reported various types of paranormal activity taking place there. Could you relate some of the paranormal activity they experienced?
It originally started out as a school for young girls. Anna Leon Owens, who was Anna and the King of Siam, she was the lady who taught Yul Brynner how to dance. She had a school there, and then that closed down. And for a while, it was a funeral home. And actually, some of the bodies from the Great Halifax explosion were taken there and taken care of there. Some of the victims from the Titanic who died, when the Titanic hit that darn iceberg, they were brought in and taken care of. Their bodies were processed there. It has always been sort of a passageway to the other side. Eventually, they built that restaurant, and I've eaten there many times. It's a ritzy place. You want to go there with your checkbook handy, but it's worth going. There's an old man that they talk about seeing halfway up the staircase, and sometimes they've seen a little girl in this great big wall-length mirror, that they've seen this little girl sort of playing inside the mirror. And one lady, she was a janitor sort of thing. She stayed and cleaned up afterwards, after the crowd had gone home and the cooks had gone home sort of thing. She tended the place, and she swore that she saw that little girl step right through the glass and walk towards her, and when she screamed, that little girl vanished. That's the stories that come to mind just off the cuff.
George's Island in Halifax, Nova Scotia, is where Acadians were imprisoned and eventually deported. The island is also believed to be overrun with ghosts. Are these ghosts the spirits of the Acadians, or are they ghosts of other people who inhabited the island?
I can tell you, it's where they put the Acadians before they deported them. It was called the Great Expulsion. But it was where they put quarantine folks who had yellow fever and cholera. There was an epidemic of cholera. A ship that came into the harbor, and the people on board were being treated to a run-in case of cholera. So they put them on that little bitty island. And George's Island, they used to call it Rabbit Island, and it's pretty near that small because it sort of looks like a rabbit hunkered down in the middle of the harbor with his great big old butt and his little tail. And it's almost like a mound of an island. What they mainly had there was a fort with enough cannon to give any enemy ships that come into the harbor a bit of trouble. They had cannon up on Citadel Hill looking down over the harbor, cannon on George's Island, and then there was cannon on the other side of the harbor in the Dartmouth area. I can't remember exactly where. They get them in a three-way sort of thing. And, saying basically it was just in case the enemy came sailing in. It's quite possible that there were a couple of stories about the Acadians, because the Acadians, at the time when they expelled them from the province, what it basically was, they were the British and the French. And for decades, they were arm wrestling over Nova Scotia. It was, sort of the doorway to the rest of the Canada. The French had landed there first and made their claim, but the British came in, and for a long time, they'd trade real estate back and forth. There'd be a big battle, and they say, now we run this part of the things. And when British got the upper hand, one of the things they decided to do, I think it might have been Cornwallis Wallace, one of the early fellas, who said, okay, let's just get them the heck out of Dodge. Let's get them right off out of the province. And they basically drove them off. They said, you're not allowed to stay in Nova Scotia any longer. For a while, they camped out there, and it was like through a whole year. There'd be storms and there'd be blizzards. And so they were suffering. If anybody had any unfinished business, I believe it would be in the Acadians, living there on that island for a while, feeling hard done by, feeling like they were getting the raw end of the deal. So they are definitely some people that I believe would have unfinished business. So certainly they would very likely have been.
In October of 1967, a flying saucer was seen over Shag Harbor. This UFO was witnessed by several people. How did they describe what they saw? How did the media and local law enforcement treat the sighting? And did any government agencies investigate it? If so, what were their findings?
I'll tell you right off, and I say it in the write-up, is that UFOs, it's not in my area of expertise, but so damn many people are still talking about the Shag Harbor sighting that I felt duty-bound to include it here. So it happened round about 11:45 on October 4th, 1967, when a car full of Nova Scotian citizens witnessed a low-flying, brightly lit object careening into the cold, starlit waters of Shag Harbor. Basically, it crashed right into the water. There was an 18-year-old fisherman named Laurie Wickens who was driving the car. Travel along with Laurie was a buddy of his as well as their girlfriends. The four of them were returning home from a dance at Cape Sable Island, about 13 miles to the east. It was a moonless night, and the skies were calm and clear. They saw the light. They thought it was a light coming from an airplane, but it didn't look like any kind of airplane they'd ever seen before. The light steadily picked up speed, heading westward, straight towards Shag Harbor. It was a plane. It was in trouble, Laura went on. It tipped this way and it tipped that way, and then it went down over a hill, and we lost sight of it. By the time we crossed over the hill where we could see it again, it had gone smack dab pancaking down into the water. By the time they reached the waterfront, several other members of the town had arrived to witness this eerie mystery soaring high above the waters. Pale, yellow, moon-shaped light hovered 8 feet above the water and 800 feet from the shore, following the ebbing October tide and trailing a long wake of pale yellow foam from behind it. Looked kind of like a big floating giant snake trail, one of the witnesses said, the slick of foam. They found themselves a dime. They'd been out partying and dancing, so they'd spent most of their free money. But they found a dime and they fed it into the payphone, and they called up the local RCMP detachment. One of the first questions they asked is, well, how much rum did you have tonight, Laurie? And he said, listen here, Mr. Man, I'm as sober as a Baptist judge on a Sunday morning. I seen what I says that I seen. Other witnesses started reporting it, and the RCMP said, by golly, we got to treat this serious. It's not just an isolated incident. The RCMP, they got themselves a boat, and they went out. They had to go through. They had to take their boat through that foam that was on the water. The foam had the consistency of shaven cream, only with a sort of glittering gold sheen across the surface. They even tried to scoop up the weird floating foam. The stuff just ran between their fingers. All we found was a patch of yellowish brown foam on the water, Laurie Smith later stated. Color looked a lot like burnt pancakes to me, you know, when they're good and brown. And somebody else added that the foam smelled foul, just like burnt sulfur. Now, one possible theory that I come across in the opinion pages of an October 2017 Halifax Chronicle Herald newspaper was that there had been a boat out there further out in the water that had these flares, a box of flares, you know, sort of like a wooden carton of flares. And it had caught a lit and gone off, sending all these lights out into the sky. And he swears, you know, the fella that owned the boat swears that that was what everybody was seeing. But I'm not so sure about that. Like I said, I'm mostly about ghost stories. But by golly, the fact that so many people saw that light come hurtling down out of the sky, crashing down into the water and leaving that great slimy old trail behind it, it kind of gets the fellow to wondering.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy We're the Ghost Star, a guide to Nova Scotia's spookiest places, and also learn about the other books you've published, how can they do that?
You can get it through Kindle, through Kobo, through Amazon. Well, Amazon is Kindle. Also, I should mention that it's available in ebook format. I'm in my 60s right now, so I need big font. I'm all about the e-readers these days. I blow that sucker up and I can read for a change, instead of teeny tiny printed font. But it's available at a better price in ebook format, or you can get the paperback. Either one is available. Buy it through Kindle, through Kobo, that's the ones that come to mind. Or you can order it through your local bookstore. All of my books are published by Nimbus Publishing. It's Nova Scotia's largest publisher.
Steve Vernon, thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. Yakking with you has been most informative. Thank you.
My pleasure, sir. I had a ball.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen. I very much appreciate your support of my channel and thank you for subscribing to it.